Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be looking at the Relative Strength Index, or RSI. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on the premium list at intothecryptoverse.com, which will end on April 17th. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, the Relative Strength Index is something we cover on the channel maybe about once a month or so. And it's useful amongst a lot of different time frames. Okay, so you might learn something on the daily that you might not see on the weekly or the monthly. So what we're going to do is we're going to systematically step through various time frames to understand kind of where we are, what is in fact the downside risk, and to plan accordingly. Now, one of the reasons we're making this video is because we were talking about how on the approach of Bitcoin to the 200-day moving average, we needed to be cognizant of the fact that back in 2018, on approach to the 200-day moving average, we in fact got rejected off of it. Okay, and we can see a couple of rejections back in 2018. In the same manner, today we are at least seeing a rejection off the 200-day moving average. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to play out exactly how 2018 played out, but I also, with that said, I think it would be silly to not at least explore the consequences, okay, if it were to play out in a similar manner. One of the things you can look at on the relative strength index is, and we talked about this a little bit, is we most recently went back up to the 70 level. Well, remember, 70 is technically overbought. Below 30, we call it technically oversold. So right now on the daily, you can see that we're around 37. So we're not technically oversold yet, but we are getting relatively close. Now, what's interesting is if you go over to the 3-day time frame, the 3-day time frame is, tells a slightly different story. And actually, what you'll notice, I don't really like drawing lines on charts, but you can kind of see the 3-day RSI continuing so far, anyways, continuing to put in lower highs. Right, the 3-day RSI has been unable to put in a higher high in quite some time. You'd have to go back all the way to January of 2021, in fact, to see a higher high really on the macro on the 3-day time frame. You could say this is a higher high from here to here, but when looking at sort of the macro, you can see we've been putting in higher or lower highs throughout this entire time. What's interesting also when I look at this is I don't really look at the 200-day moving average on the 3-day very much, but you can see there are some similarities. And what I want to draw your attention to is the fact that if the bottom falls out, right? If the bottom falls out, which we don't know if it's going to or not, but if it does, and we see that, that capitulation type event like we saw back in 2018, then this would yield more than likely an accumulation phase of a lifetime. Okay, looking back at this chart, anytime Bitcoin goes below the 200-day moving average on the 3-day, so really it's like the 600-day moving average, right? Anytime it goes below it in the past, that is the golden opportunity of, let's say, the accumulation phase of a lifetime, right? Anytime it goes below it, okay, you can see in 2014, in 2018, and in 2020, it's such a great opportunity for Bitcoin. We're still, just above it right now. I think it's coming in at around 39K, 39.3, 39.4K, depending on the exchange that you use. But you should be aware that if Bitcoin goes below this level, then this would be, if history is any indication, a fairly attractive accumulation phase. Okay, so you can see the RSI on the 1-day, on the 3-day. You can see that it's putting in lower highs. If you go look at it on the weekly, again, you can see a very similar story. But one of the more interesting things about the weekly is that you can also sort of see where does it historically bottom. So if you were to take a line and sort of draw at the lowest point, you can see that historically on the weekly RSI, Bitcoin tends to bottom when it reaches around 28 or so. All right, 28 at the lowest. That's what we've seen in the past. There have also been a couple of times, though, where it bottomed at a higher weekly RSI than 28. You can see that happened back in 2011, and you can see that it happened back in March of 2020. And during those phases, the weekly RSI bottomed at around 35. So the argument is that fairly attractive bottoms for Bitcoin, at least historically, occur between 28 and 35. Right now, the weekly RSI is at 45. So, if at some point in the next few months, if we're looking at this and the weekly RSI is, say, between 28 and 35, that could be an indication of a fairly attractive area for Bitcoin if we make it there. Again, there's no guarantees. Sometimes we make it down to the 28 level, and then sometimes we don't, right? Sometimes we stop shy of it and only go back into the 30s before turning back around. You should note though that back in January, the weekly RSI already went to 37. I mean, not quite as low as 32, but we did see a lower low. So if Bitcoin is destined to put in another lower low, then it basically gets us to that range that we've discussed, right? To that, if it does something like this, it would get us to that range. And I want people to pay attention to this range if it plays out. We don't know yet, right? We really don't know. But it is certainly, it's something that we need to be aware of. If you go look at the 2-week RSI, you can see that it tends to bottom somewhere between, say, 34 and 40. Okay, and maybe I can just draw a rectangle here to sort of highlight where it tends to bottom. That's where the 2-week RSI tends to bottom between about 30, 32, and 40. You can see right now that the 2-week RSI is around 48.5. So again, what you'll notice amongst the shorter time frames is that we're already getting to be somewhat oversold or getting close to it. But on the more macro scale, if we are going to continue decreasing in price, we can see that at least there is more room to theoretically go if history is any indication before things could actually turn around. You can see that it turned around here back at around 40 in March of 2020, and then in December 2018 it turned around at around 40 as well, maybe a little bit less, maybe around 36 or 37. Turned around in January 2015 at 33 or 34, and then it turned around in November of 2011 at 40 or 41. So if we are destined to go back down to these levels, I do think that it's at least worth watching. It could be a very quick capitulation for all we know if it plays out. And sometimes, for instance, sometimes you'll spend months there, but then other times it's nothing more than a capitulation wick, and if you blink, you'll miss it. So just be aware that this could in fact play out. Now, I also think it's worthwhile to look at on the monthly time frame as well. Okay, so the monthly tells even more of a story, right? So if you go look at this on the monthly time frame, you can see that the historical bottoms tend to occur at around 44. Right around 44. It happened in 2015. We saw a bottom in early 2019 and late 2018 at around 44. March of 2020 didn't even make it there. So again, there's no guarantee you're ever going to make it there. But currently, it's at around 54. So the bottoms on the monthly tend to be around 44, but we're at 54. Now remember, we could easily do something like this where we go back up and then we come back down later and go to it. So I don't want you to think that it has to happen at any certain time. It's just to recognize that if it does happen, you want to make sure you take advantage of it. So that's where the RSI currently stands. And actually, one of the things I also wanted to mention, if you go look at the daily, in order to break these trends, we would like to see something a little bit more sustainable than just simply putting in, say, a lower high. Again, if you look at the daily RSI and you go all the way back to, say, early 2021, you can see that we're still putting in lower highs. Okay, so the idea here is that, realistically speaking, what we'd like to see is we'd like to see this daily RSI get out of the rut that it's in and ultimately start a different trend. We could also imagine this on, say, like the 3-day time frame, getting out of this downtrend, okay, that we're in. We'd like to see Bitcoin get out of these downtrends in order for us to really start to flip bullish. And remember, when going back to the 200-day, The 200-day is an important level, and we have been unable to break it. And we talked about how the 200-day moving average can be a very difficult and formidable opponent for Bitcoin. And so, here we are. We've been rejected by the 200-day moving average yet again. We're coming down. I think we're slightly below the 100-day moving average at the current time. In order for us to really flip the narrative, we need to turn this thing around by seeing it reflected also on the relative strength index. That has not happened yet. And until it happens, you need to understand, and I mean at all times, you need to understand there is, of course, the downside risk that you need to take into account. And therefore, you can see that it reflected in the weekly RSI, the monthly RSI, the 3-day, and the 1-day RSI. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. We also do have the sale on the premium list at intothecryptoverse.com. You'll get access to weekly reports and videos. We have a website with a ton of charts built out, quantitative charts, on-chain, social metrics, risk charts, logarithmic regression for a lot of different cryptocurrencies. Make sure you check it out, intothecryptoverse.com. That will run for another 6 days. Thank you for tuning in. Subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.